Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Weekly Wind-Up with me, Helen Ashcroft. Now, a Caribbean Heritage Trail was launched as part of Huddersfield's Black History Month programme. A guided walk took place on Sunday the 9th of October, which introduced people to sites and stories associated with the rise and cultural contribution of Huddersfield's Caribbean community over almost 70 years. The trail recaptures some of the pioneer years from the late 1940s to the early 1970s, when people came by invitation to work in the town. So my guests today are here to talk about the trail, and that's Heather Norris-Nicholson and Natalie Pinnock-Hamilton. Thank you ever so much for coming along today. It's a really interesting subject, this. So tell me, to start with, who devised this Caribbean trail? And why did you decide that the trail was actually needed?
Members of BAC, Building African Caribbean Communities, decided to devise the trail to give visibility to the Caribbean heritage within Huddersfield. It was devised collaboratively, gathering photographs from lots of different sources and then putting lots of information drawn from a wider context in to give a broader understanding of how local history fits into a national story of people coming from the Caribbean to the UK in the post-war period.
So on this trail there are specific places. So I can't remember them all in order, so I've got a list, but could you just explain a little bit about each one, if that's all right? Mm-hmm. So the first one of the 12 is St George's Square.
Well, Caribbean people arrived at St George's Square. They were either invited or they came on their own speed, and St George's Station was the place that they arrived at. They went to London and then they would get a train to St George's Square and then sent to the various places of work.
Wow, I wonder what the first impression was when they came out of the building and looked across.
Depends on what time of the year, I suppose. Yeah. It could be bleak, grey and damp.
True enough. Right, the next place on the list is Brian Jackson House and the New North Road Baptist Church.
Those two places are both really significant because they were very, very central to the support mechanisms to the newly arriving people from the Caribbean. Hazel Wigmore at what has become Brian Jackson House, was involved with childminding initiatives and also children's Saturday clubs. They were essential at a time when there really wasn't very much support for people. Indeed, children were being sent back to the Caribbean to be cared for. Now, some of these initiatives led on to the setting up of the National Children's Centre. It then became the Yorkshire Children's Centre. Hazel Wigmore's role at the Baptist Church, meanwhile, ensured that there was a place of welcome and support for people who had been very familiar with going to church on Sunday in the Caribbean and wanted to come, didn't always find a welcome, but they found it there at Baptist Church.
Okay, so the third place on the list is actually Greenhead Road. What's significant about Greenhead Road?
Oh, that's where many of the Huddersfield's first Caribbean babies were born, in what was then the Municipal Maternity Hospital,
right.
Later renamed to be the Princess Royal Health Centre and now closed. So that's an important place to stop and on the trail, because it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about the government recruitment of staff directly from the Caribbean to help staff the National Health Service when it set up in 1948.
I'm finding out all sorts. This is brilliant. Okay, so the next place on the list, 1, 2, 3, this is the fourth place, Antilles Credit Union.
Yes, in the Caribbean the credit unions are very popular, and working people used it as a means of saving.
Right.
When they came over to England, because they weren't able to open bank accounts, they continued the tradition of credit unions, and they had a few buildings before they moved to the one on Trinity Street, which they were eventually able to purchase. At the moment, it's run as a social club.
Right.
The credit union, as it was, no longer exists.
So the next place, Greenhead Park. Well, I know where Greenhead Park is, but what's the significance there?
Oh, Greenhead Park was a place that people would go to on Sunday afternoons for a bit of fresh air after going to church in the morning, and they'd turn up there in their Sunday best, and because where they were staying was often quite limited, number of families sharing different rooms within a house.
Yeah.
So open space was important. So out into the Huddersfield sunshine, Sunday best, and perhaps an opportunity to have a photograph taken, and that could be sent back to the Caribbean just to say, hey, we're alive and well.
Springwood Avenue and Water Street. Now, isn't that where Springgrove School is?
It is, yeah, Springgrove
Right.
School, to which Trevor Bergin was head teacher. And
Right.
that's one of the areas, probably the main area, that people from the Caribbean lived at when they first came. My parents, for example, lived with 6 other people in one house. And
Right.
that's 8 people altogether in one house, and that happened quite a lot.
The 7th place of interest I've got is Merton Straight, Springwood Street.
Now that's an area which is really close to Springgrove School.
Right.
And it's right in the heartland of one of the early areas, residential areas.
Okay.
And that's important because some of the open space there around
Yeah.
what is now the ventilation tower for the tunnel,
Yes.
bringing the railway lines into Huddersfield. That became that had seating, and that became known locally as a place to discuss the issues of the day. And there were some benches there that apparently were known as the Houses of Parliament.
Okay, the next one, Venn Street.
Well,
What's the
Venn
significance?
Street is in Huddersfield town centre.
Yes.
And there was a club. It was originally a theatre,
Okay.
and the club became known as Venn Street, even though it had names, like it was called Silver Sands at one time,
Okay.
and other names. But everybody referred to it as Venn Street because it was really the only place you could go and listen to Caribbean music at the time. And people from all over the country would visit it because the guy running it at the time would get artists.
Yeah.
All the top artists from Jamaica would appear there. So we
And
got
when
all
was
the
that?
artists.
When was that in go? When did people go there?
60s, 70s, right through into the
Yeah.
early 80s.
Yeah.
And I think that streets association with the music culture of Huddersfield, and really sort of saw a death in the late 80s with urban redevelopment, and now there's a big car park there, I believe.
Yeah.
Seems to have a theme with car parks or
I
bus
know.
stations, don't we? Which has
Yeah.
got a car park.
There was other clubs, but that was the biggest, and
Right.
where people all met their partners. And,
Yeah. So, we've gone through the 12 places, and I have to say, even though I've lived in Huddersfield all these years, I certainly have learnt a lot from that. And I have seen, and I'm hoping that it's going to be on the programme today, the leaflet that actually lists the places and has a map inside. Where can people get those maps from?
Those leaflets are part of a series that are available right through the centre of Huddersfield, in public libraries, at the railway station, at the media centre, and it will be out in community centres as well. We're hoping to get a slightly larger print because it's quite small.
Right.
So they can also find it by going online via Facebook at Discover Huddersfield, or via Twitter.
Well, it's been really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much, Natalie. Remember, if you would like to comment on this or any of the other videos on our site, you can do so by the usual means. I'm Helen Ashcroft. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to everybody who's working so hard behind the scenes to make all this possible.
Hey.